Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. My guest today is Warren Odes. He is a Broadway legend. He's a studio legend and New York City all around legend. And glad to have him on my podcast. Thank you for being here. I have a bunch of questions, like I always say at the very beginning of my podcast. And usually the first one is, where are you from?
I was born in Brooklyn, but then we moved to Massapequa, Long Island when I was 3. I lived there until I was 10. Then I moved to New Jersey for a year, and then back to Long Island to Seaford till I was 18. And then I went to college and moved into the city the next year.
What's your first musical memory?
My parents played a lot of records, but the guy across the street had a snare drum. And he used to bring the snare drum over, and I was like totally enamored with it.
Why?
Yeah, I don't know, man. Yeah, I think that's. But my parents played a lot of, Count Basie and Sarah Vaughan and Frank Sinatra. And my sister was 5 years older, so then I got the Johnny Mathis, Little Anthony and the Imperials, that generation.
Did you remember the first record that you either begged your parents to get or brought on your own?
I kind of remember, I don't know who bought it, maybe my sister or me, Meet the Beatles.
Really?
Yeah. I was 10 when the Beatles, that night, that famous night on Ed Sullivan.
Did you watch it?
And I sure did. And it blew my mind, like most people my generation.
Okay, what was it
Uh,
about that performance that blew your mind? A lot of people say the same thing. What was it about that particular performance? You just
it
never
was
seen
like
anything
they,
like it?
it was like they came on a shuttle from Mars. It was so different than anything anyone had ever seen. The sound of it, the way they looked. Plus, you can never write this off when you talk about famous people of that level. Just a mad amount of charisma. Mad amounts of charisma. I think, even George Martin, who went on to produce them, at first, he was like, I don't get it with these guys, but whatever. He knew that they had some kind of charisma, some magic. And some people just have that, man. And they had it put the four of them together. I mean, we're still talking about the Beatles.
Mm-hmm.
Just really charismatic kind of people.
Were you a big Ringo Starr fan shortly after that?
Yes. But uh, not, you know what? Not till I became a teenager. When I was younger, okay, I mean, going was a family friend. My father was not a musician, but he used to go into the city with my mother, and they used to go see Joe play at the Embers a lot. Joe used to come out to our house. He was a family friend, and I kind of knew he was really famous. I'm like 6 or 7 or 8, and I'm listening to those records around the house. His daughter used to come. His daughter Barbara used to stay with us for 2 weeks at a time. And this, I don't think I was. I don't think Ringo's drumming particularly drew my attention. I think the Beatles did. Then when I became a teenager and started playing in bands, then I kind of tapped into like, wow, this is great. But I was more into the music of the Beatles than his particular drumming.
You said that a neighbor had a snare drum. Did you eventually get that snare drum, or you
I
just
did.
saw it?
Yeah, I didn't get that one, but my parents bought me a toy snare drum, whatever, you know, little thing on some stands with some sticks, and I played the snare drum. And then I eventually, like old people, banging on pots and pans. Then they took me for some lessons.
Was that in elementary school?
I wasn't in any music programs. I was too cool for that, Clayton. If I had to do it again, I'd be in every one of those programs now. But no, I didn't do anything in school like that. I took the private lessons, and after the Beatles, anyone who had any instrument, you're now forming a band. So if the other guy had anything, you're forming a band. And we used to use. His father had like a Weber tape recorder. We used the microphone to sing into. It was real primitive, man. But whatever the other person had, you now have a band. Any combination of any things. I didn't know any people with clarinets or any instruments like that. It was all guitars and basses, and Hammond organs. So I took the music lessons, and then in high school, like I said, I was way too cool to be in any band. There's no way I'm going to be in marching band or symphony band or any, stage, whatever. But I did join when I was trying to get into college. So I had to all of a sudden try to play catch up and look like I'm a legitimate musician because I was really just a rock musician. And so I joined the band, I think in 11th to 12th grade, joined the Huntington Training Orchestra for kids, symphony kind of thing. But I was late to that whole scene. Like I said, man, I so wish I did all the marching band, rudimental kind of stuff.
Well, when you were starting out with the lessons, did you look up to any other drummers other than Ringo? And I know you had Joe Jones come around, but were there any other influences in your life that you looked up to as far as drumming?
In teenage land,
Yes.
yeah, Buddy Rich completely blew my mind. We used to go see him play. And I just feel bad. I hate to say it for anyone who hasn't been in a room when he was playing. I mean, the records are great, the videos, but it's just a tsunami of joy when this cat played. A tsunami of joy.
That's
It's
great.
just euphoria on, you just can't believe what's happening. The air moving towards you, and this maniac is doing this. And it's not just a chops thing. He was like bigger than life kind of guy. He was amazing. Of course, John Bonham. Love John Bonham. Shelly Manne.
Did you ever see Led Zeppelin back then?
Unfortunately, I didn't. My friends went and I didn't go.
Keith Moon?
My only experience with Keith Moon was, I don't know how this happened. I was in an elevator in New York City and the Who walked in the elevator.
And you said, who? No, I'm going to stop that.
It was just, Pete Townsend is, you can't miss that guy. He's really recognizable. I was like, they were talking about business. I don't know. I was 14 or 15 or something.
Buddy Rich,
Everybody
John
loved
Bonham.
Bob.
Buddy Rich, John Bonham, Shelly Manne.
Everybody loved Bobby Columbia in those days. He was amazing.
Which
Loved
group was
BJ
he in
Wilson.
again?
What's that?
Which group was he in again?
Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
Oh, Blood, Sweat, and Tears.
Bobby Columbia.
Ah.
Kind of like, it was some sort of innovation, man. I mean, that fluidity that a jazz drummer has with rock rhythms. It's kind of like new on the scene with that stuff. But there was, in those days, one after another, just mind-bending innovation.
Do you remember your first band that you played with in high school or junior high? And do you remember the name of it?
Well, the rock bands that I had
Mm-hmm.
were called the Trampling Hum.
The Trampling Hum?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Well, we changed it to Hum, so it got better.
It's deep.
We played a lot of gigs, man. I mean, look, in those days, live music ruled. I mean, in high school, I was playing 6 nights a week in lounges. But
Do you remember what you got paid back then?
I don't remember. Maybe 14, playing at a Halloween party and getting $25. And that was it. I was hooked then, man. What? Play the drums, $25? This is amazing. I mean, in those days also, I can't leave out Dino Danelli from the Rascals.
Okay.
And people in my neighborhood, we all bought those drums, Pink Champagne Ludwig drums that I still have.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. And he's still great, man. I mean, he was a Sonny Payne reinvented as a rock drummer. Just really incredibly exciting guy. And I got to see them a couple of times.
You finished high school and you decided to go study music in college.
I went to Manhattan School of Music.
Now, why did you choose there and not, as I often hear people go to Berkeley, Juilliard?
Well, I don't think I could have gotten in Juilliard. I had no symphonic background. Somehow in my last 2 years, like 11th and 12th grade, I got a xylophone, practiced it to try to get in. And And then I did this Huntington Training Orchestra. I really just barely snuck into Manhattan. I got in, I think, on a conditional 6-month trial basis. Honestly, I think they needed students at the time. You know, they were a business like anyone else. But when I got in, I killed myself to try to, get in the groove. But the whole thing was like being a salmon, man. I was, you're in a conservatory with kids who've been going to Juilliard prep and, all these real classical backgrounds. They knew all the symphonies. I didn't know anything, man.
Did you gravitate towards people that listen to a lot of the same music that you listened to growing up, or did you wind up going towards more symphonic players and learning from them, or was it a combination of all the above?
Yeah, it was a combination of all of the above. I mean, I was at Manhattan during an incredibly great time. A lot of great classical musicians and a lot of great jazz musicians. Bob Minster was there, Buddy Williams, Angie Bofield, Mitch Foreman, Kenny Kirkland. Just that's the way it was in the city in those days, right? Mark Sherman was around the periphery there. Joe Pissarro was doing some I think he was doing graduate work. I used to see Joe up there who was playing all this contemporary classical music. He was amazing. I was in the jazz band in college. And this is the beginning days of that whole college jazz. Manhattan is a classical school. They didn't look kindly upon this whole jazz thing.
Oh, wow.
Oh man, no. I mean, but Rusty Dietrich he had the band, and we would go to competitions and win because we had like graduate students. Like John Faddis was in the band for a minute, and then these, like I said, graduate students. So they would play in the band, and David Friedman had a little jazz class, but it was really not, it was really frowned upon. It was really classical music.
So when you were going to Manhattan School of Music back then, Berkeley was a very hot school as well. Now, why didn't you choose Berkeley?
Why didn't I choose Berkeley? That's a great question. One reason is if I stayed in Manhattan, I could make a living and I needed money.
Were you
Like,
working?
what's that?
Were you doing gigs at night?
My father died when I was 10. So, money it was an issue, right? Yeah, was I gigging? I was totally gigging. I was playing weddings on the weekends. And then because I'll say I lead a charmed life, Milt Hinton got me this gig playing with Bernie Layton's quartet at Jimmy Weston's. Bernie Layton, if you look on the internet, is one of the premier studio musicians of the time. And in that band, Milt Hinton, Bernie, and then Bernie would send in subs and they were like Hank Jones, Derek Smith, and then the guitarist, Gene Bernstein was there. And so I got to meet all these guys and work with them. I worked with Hank Jones and towards in my third year of school, I met Wally Harper because I was subbing for my teacher from when I was a kid, Al Pollock, who was a percussionist. When I subbed on the show, Irene, and met Wally Harper, who was Barbara Cook's accompanist. And he invited me to do her comeback record at Carnegie Hall. So in my third year of school, I did this big deal thing on Columbia Records. Looking back, I can't believe that this guy trusted me with this task. I was like 20 years old.
Wow.
Wow, exactly. I mean, kind of cuckoo, man. And, that's the theme of my story. I think it's anybody's story is you do something well over here, someone recommends you over there.
You graduated what year?
76.
Okay. I usually ask people
Yeah.
that were around in the 70s and 80s in New York City. Did you prefer the New York City of the mid 70s and 80s as opposed to the New York City of the 2010s when you had Broadway, which is, at the peak of its powers financially, it's safe and Times Square is nice and Disneyfied. And do you prefer the energy back then? I know there's a difference when it comes to the amount of work for musicians, but did you like it safer, or do you like it a little bit more dangerous, or
Yeah.
both?
Everything's a trade-off, right? I was at a different point in my life then too. There's no doubt that it was more artist friendly. There were so many clubs, and a lot of us lived in lofts. I had a loft on 22nd Street, and there was just clubs left and right. It's just an incredibly great time for artists. And the corporate thing is it's a drag. I mean, it's a total drag. I mean, then there were more shops. You'd go on 8th Avenue, and the guy on the second floor was the guy who fixed watches. Like Ippolito's little drum store was up there. It was a more folksy, artsy thing. But yeah, the trade-off was safety. I mean, I used to go, I can't believe I did this, to Slugs. You know what Slugs was?
Mm-mm.
Slugs was where Lee Morgan got shot. It was a killer jazz club on
No
10th
pun intended.
between B and C. And in those days, man, like Mad Max in the Thunderdome, the car on fire in the middle of the street.
Damn, it was like that.
Eerie, man.
I heard Alphabet City was not the place you wanted to
You
be.
you can't believe it, man. That was the scariest. And I have like shoulder length hippie head hair dude from Long Island. Even going to the Fillmore then was like, you had to pay attention, man. Subways were brutal.
Ah,
I mean, everything's a trade-off, man, because now it's try to own a restaurant or a club or rent an apartment.
right.
Please, man.
So
I
tell
mean,
me,
yeah.
I've always been curious as to how it really was back in the 70s and 80s. Now, when I got here in New York City in 1993, I had a drum set, I had a cart, I had a car too. So I'd take my car from Jersey City and drive through and pay $4 to get into the Holland Tunnel, and paying $1 for gas back then. And then I take my drums and then park and then go play a gig and get paid $50 and go back and like, yeah, I made it. Did you live in the city and you took the subway? You brought your drums that way, or were there drums in the clubs? You said there were clubs everywhere. Did people bring their own stuff? And you said you played 6 nights a week in certain places. How did that all work out?
Um, well, the 6 nights a week was when I lived in Long Island. How did it work out? It was scary. I did take the subway. I did everything. I did whatever I wanted to do and just did it. Um,
So where were your drums? They were in the loft?
Clubs didn't have drums,
Oh, wow. Okay.
and recording studios didn't have drums.
So you took your drums to recording sessions too?
I worked there was a recording studio on Christopher Street, downtown Sound maybe, and I had no money. I never had money really, and I didn't have enough money to put it in a cab or something. So I took the drums on the subway. Yeah, it was unbearable. And these were the old days with the hard cases. You couldn't even like wrap them around. By the time I got to the gig, I couldn't even play. I was like toasted. In those days, recording studios some had drums, but they usually had like A&R had a bass drum, and then you brought all your stuff, and they had something like a drum club, and it was like these trap cases with a lock on it. I didn't belong to that club. Um, and some of them had like tom toms, but it wasn't like today where you go in the power station or any of these studios or all these clubs around New York that have drums. Even the Bitter End, which was not that long ago, you probably did gigs there. It's like 80 bands trying to bring their stuff in and out, and everyone's freaked out that someone's going to steal everything.
Yep.
And there were no drums anywhere. But in those days also, man, I feel like Father Time here, but there were like long runs at clubs. I used to work with Jackie and Roy, the singing duo. We would play at Michael's Pub for maybe a month, or you'd play at Fat Tuesdays for a week or two. Uh,
So you'd leave your stuff there,
you'd
obviously.
leave stuff there. I was in the house band at Sweetwater's for a while. Did you ever play there?
Yeah, I remember Sweetwater's. It was just leaving when I first got here. A lot of the clubs that were part of the New York City heyday, like Mikkel's and Sweetwater's,
Yeah.
and no, what's the place on? Man, not Kenny's Castaways, but there's a place on Park Avenue.
Oh, Max's Kansas City?
Yes, Max's Kansas City. All that was
Yeah.
like about to go out. Luckily, I played
Yeah.
CBGBs and Sweetwater and some of that stuff, but I missed on Mikkel's. Maybe I didn't really know I should have gone because I heard so many stories. But anyway, you played Sweet. You were in the house band for Sweetwaters. Interesting.
I did it for a long time. I on and off, and I was on the road a lot in those days too.
So you do a week in these places. They pay you per night, or they pay you for the week.
Well, usually I was working. Well, Sweetwater's I was being paid by the club. I don't remember how they paid us. I guess for the week or something. And then maybe if you had a sub, you paid the sub or something. And whatever artist I was working with, they would pay me. It was different then, man. Everything was different. It's always different, right?
So yeah, exactly. Because I talked to Bill Lanham about what it was like being in a pit in the 80s and having subs come in, or what was like subbing. You take your recorder, and they didn't have the conductor cam, and you'd have to just listen, and then oh man, so much easier for you guys nowadays. Got it so easy.
Yes and no, Clayton. I'm going to give you the yes and no if you want to hear it.
All right, we'll get to that in a minute. We'll get to that in a minute. So we'll get to the Broadway stuff in a minute. I just want to hear your. We'll put that in the back of our minds to remember that. You started playing around town, doing gigs in certain clubs and doing some touring. And did you do a lot of recording sessions right out of after college? And
I did. I left school 2 weeks early. My professors let me leave. I went on the road with Jackie and Roy, singing duo. And they were jazzy. And we went to Boston and Toronto. And it was my first real go on the road experience. And it was incredible amount of fun and very high level playing. And I was in and out of town a lot in those days. I didn't really make it my goal to become a studio guy, whatever that means. I worked with Judy Collins for a long time. We were always on the road. It was a lot of this always on the road, come back, road, back. And I did everything. I played at weddings. There was a lot of studio work then too. I mean, it was an incredible amount. I used to sub for Gary Muir, who had quite a career, on jingle dates and stuff. And then he said to me, "Hey, I don't want to go away. Do you want to go to Japan with Astrid Gilberto?" And I said, "Okay." And I went to Japan with her, and these guys were so busy and they were so afraid of leaving, I guess, their slot. There was a lot of work, man. You could play a lot of weddings.
Gary Chester.
Yeah.
He told him, if you go out for more than 4 weeks, it's not a good thing. You'll never, work a lot again. And then he wound up going out on a bunch of different Broadway tours. He was out for, I think he said 9 years, I think. So he wound up going in a direction that was against what his teacher told him to do, because back then, if you left town, then you weren't part of the whole studio scene and couldn't take over when someone else couldn't do it. But Gary wound up carving out his own career on Broadway. So you weren't part of necessarily the whole studio scene. I understand.
In all honesty, I was an adjunct. I did a lot of recording sessions, but I wasn't Steve Gadd. Let's not kid ourselves. I wasn't a 6-day a week, 3 sessions a day guy, and maybe bad planning on my part. I would start to develop relationships with people, jingle guys and other guys, and they would call me. And then I would, like Gary Chester said, I would go away and be NGing all the time because I was away for a week. And, they call someone else because it's New York City and we're talented people here.
Radio registry, and I've heard a lot about that.
Yeah.
Tell me more about that. I don't really understand exactly how it worked.
Yeah, that was an answering service, and they kind of knew your schedule. And these studios had a phone, like the Bat line, and they would find you at whatever studio you were at and say, "Hey, there's a gig for you at 2. Can you do it? Do you want to do it?" and they would keep you schedule. So a contractor would say, well, get me this guy, that girl, whatever. And they would book you sessions. And there was a lot of last minute stuff. It was a fruitful time, man. You got to remember, every piece of music was handmade. Every piece of music was handmade. There was no synthesizers. Every jingle thought demo had to have at least a piano player. You know, I used to work up at Chapel Music. They had a demo studio. It wasn't like today we have Logic and you make a demo. How, how are you going to make it? When those days, people didn't have recording studios in the houses. So there was a heavy tier system. The A-Cats, the Steve Gadd guys, B, C, D, E, down the line. There were the jingle guys. There were the record guys. There were the Broadway guys. There were the club date guys. It was a caste system.
Which brings me to Broadway. I understand back then, since there was so much work, a lot of people didn't really look to Broadway as a career option because there were so many other things. You had tours, you had TV shows, you had recording sessions, you had jingles. It's like Broadway, and plus the music wasn't as cool as it is now, I suppose. Now a lot of things are basically pop shows, so it's more contemporary. What was the thing that got you into? Did you get into Broadway in the 70s or was it the 80s? And what got you into it?
It was hard in those days. The union contract wasn't like it is now. You couldn't take off. You were at the mercy of the conductor or the contractor. People paid their own subs. If I
Wow.
subbed to you in your show, you would write me a check or hand me some money, and you would get all the benefits. And there wasn't this 50% thing. You kind of like taking off was a big deal. It was hard to do. So to get a top tier kind of person in a Broadway show who was going to be called for record dates all the time, it was hard, man. So how did I get into it? I subbed for my teacher at Irene, the show Irene. The conductor said to me, hey, I got a show. Do you want to do it? I said, no. You're saying, why did you say no? Because I was 20, 18, 19. I wanted to change the world. I wanted to be the next Tony Williams or whatever, the way you think when you're that age, right? And in those days, like the Broadway pits were like these old kind of drunk guys, angry. They were kind of scary.
Unlike today, no, I'm just kidding.
Nah, people today they're disciplined, man.
No,
The
I
work
know.
is hard to get, and people don't want to blow it, But those days it was like people didn't talk to each other. Like, it was weird, and I was really young, and they were really old, and I wanted to do young person things,
Mhm.
But then I always subbed a little bit here and there, and I was one of those people that said, "Well, how do you get into this scene?" Because by then I really needed to get into that scene. I needed more steady income. I needed health benefits. I had 2 kids. I used to play with this guy, Kirk Nura, who's a composer and a jazz pianist. We had a free jazz group, and he was still dabbling in commercial music, and he became orchestrator of this show, Three Musketeers. He recommended me. I did the show. Red Press was the contractor. Gordon Harrell was the conductor. Show lasted 2 weeks, huge failure. But Gordon got to like me and know me, and he called me for some other things. We did things, Senator Joe, some wacky thing with this woman. She was on the cover of Time magazine because she stole all the money. Della Holtzman or something. It was a really avant-garde piece. But I couldn't get arrested in the Broadway thing, and sure enough, one day, John Miller calls me and says, do you want to do this show, The Life? And I think Gordon Harrell, I don't know to this day how it happened, but I got to think that Gordon Harrell pushed the issue because I knew John from doing some recording sessions with him. But I don't know if he thought of me in those days as a Broadway musician, which is another kind of musician. That's how it happened, man. It's so weird that playing in Kirk Nurop's free jazz group, it's just the tie to me playing the life, Cy Coleman's The Life. Go
Wow.
figure. Crazy, right?
The Life. You said it ran for 2 weeks?
Three Musketeers ran for 2 weeks.
Okay.
That was a failure. And then a couple of years went by, and then the show The Life came up for me.
And how long did that run?
I don't know, man. A year or two? I can't remember.
And that was your chair.
That was my chair. My first grown-up big boy Broadway chair. And I also became the in-house contractor,
Oh, wow.
which was pretty, scary. And this is the days, I know we're going back to the colonial times rap here, but there's no internet, brother. So, there was no like, let me email you the thing. You could look at the cells and see what's wrong. And it was difficult. I had no experience.
Did you think right after you got that show and it ran for a while, it's like, you know what? I like this. Or was it like, it's a gig? What was your mindset at the time?
No, my mindset was, yeah, this is great. It was a very high level of playing, very high level. David Spinoza was the guitarist, one of the greatest musicians I've ever met.
I've heard many
And
stories about him.
Yes, and they're wonderful
love to meet him.
guy, a wonderful man, and there's no higher part of the food chain in the land of music than this guy. And working with him every night was like, wow. Gary Haas was playing, and Mark Berman, and Greg Gisbert. It was a world-class band under Cy Coleman's direction, who was one of the greatest composers ever. It was very intense, and I really enjoyed the concert level concentration every night because I also had done a ton of club dates. The thing about the weddings and stuff, I didn't mind the weddings. Part that bugged me most was the schlepping, which was kind of unbearable. But even on a par with that was the musicians themselves and how they would just be so disrespectful to the music, and it was like, man, come on, guys. It's like there was this kind of belief with those musicians. It was like, well, when I get the gig with Sting, then I'll be good. And I was thinking like, no, dude, you have to be good here and then Sting finds you. You see how that works? I going sideways. When I was in college doing club dates, I was doing club dates, and this guy, Henry Gross, he was in Sha Na Na. He was between record deals. He liked my playing. I went and played in his band. He had a top 10 record in the 70s, Shannon. I was in his band for a couple of years. We opened for Aerosmith and the Doobie Brothers, and it was professional rock and roll, man. And that was from a club date because he heard my playing on the club date.
Wow, that's great.
So for anybody out there who's thinking whatever they're thinking, I'm just going to put it out there now while we're going ADD. You got to have the Hippocratic Oath, do no harm, save the patient, save the patient. So I really enjoyed that part of the Broadway thing, how, you go back, it's like a golf game. You want it to be better the next night. You're always trying to perfect this, tea ceremony thing that you're doing over and over again. I mean, I'm not going to lie, it gets a little nuts sometimes, and last thing you feel like doing is playing that music again. But I enjoyed the professionalism.
How did you keep things fresh after doing it for a while?
Well, I took off and did other gigs, which I highly recommend. You have to take off, play other music. I'm just pretty self-disciplined that way. I'm my own worst critic. I really go to the gig, any gig, and go, well, that's good enough. I think musicians on our level, we don't need someone to tell us that it didn't go well. We want it to go well, man. It's never good enough for us. Well, I was out of tune, but it's okay. No, it's not okay. I remember like going on recording sessions with all the heavy hitters. I used to work for Score Productions a little. You'd see like the Brecker brothers there and Eddie Daniels, the cream of the crop guys of that time, playing some really crappy music sometimes. And these guys were playing like their lives depended on it. Then, on the way out, you'd hear them go, man, was that the worst crap you ever heard? You got to save the patient, right?
The
So that's,
Hippocratic Oath. I like that approach.
you got to, man, you got to save the patient. Do no harm. Do no harm. I always think about that when I'm on the worst gig. I go, all right, so if Nathan East and Steve Gadd were on this gig, would they just go, yeah, you know what? Let's just rush play on. Yeah, it's just who cares? No, they would kill themselves to make it work somehow. That's the only way they know. There's only one way,
And that's why they are at the top, as you said, at the top of the food chain.
Top of the food chain, man.
Still.
Do no harm.
The Civil War. Tell me about that. Was that after your first show? After the light?
Civil War. I forgot about that. We didn't use click tracks. I kind of wish we did.
Is that the thing that you were going to bring up earlier when I was talking about how kids, young people have it easy today when it comes to playing shows as opposed to back then?
And that's not what I was going to say, but it could be included in that conversation. The Civil War was... He wrote some great songs. The show, I think it was supposed to just be a concert, and then at the last minute, the producers freaked out, said you got to make a story out of this somehow. Too much meddling. It was just supposed to, I think, be a concert. The greatest assembly of singers I've ever been around, one after the other, man. If he's insane singers, man. That guy Shield, who was in Rent, I don't know what this guy had a boy. They all had Clayton, like your name. What was his name? Passed away. John Clayton? No. He was an unbelievable singer. He died recently.
Not David Clayton Thomas.
No, but I played with them a little too. I played with Blood, Sweat, and Tears a little.
Ah, that's great.
No, this guy, I can't think of his name, man. Just great singers, really good songs, really amazing band, and challenging, man, to hit those tempos every night, Very challenging.
So before we go any further, I just found out, is this true that you were the drummer in the Dick Cavett show?
Bob Cranshaw put the band together. An amazing man, beautiful man. He just was so helpful to me. Just can't say enough about this guy, man. I mean, actually, him and Milt Denton really... Milt was the guy, like I told you, he put me in pro land overnight. And Bob used to hire me for all kinds of stuff. He was just... Anybody who knew this man, I don't know what kind of Christ-like figure he was. He was just really fantastic. He could have hired anyone to do anything, and he hired me. So we did that, and that only went, I think, 13 weeks. It was syndicated, and it was during the Mets' famous
World Series
blowout with the Red Sox. That was the series when the ball went through.
Yes.
So the show kept getting pushed back into it was 3 a.m. in some markets. People didn't really see it. We were in a battle of the bands too with David Brenner. He had an amazing band on his show with Spinoza and Andy Newmark and Frankie Santano.
Oh, man.
I think Shelton might have been in that band.
Really?
I'm not sure. But anyhow, it didn't last long, unfortunately. But we did have some great guests. Miles Davis was on. That was incredibly amazing. We used to do the show from Saturday Night Live set. So all these NBC guys like Paul Schaefer and Steve Jordan, people were coming in from the walls to be in the room with Miles Davis, because is there a bigger rock star than Miles Davis?
Right.
It was exciting, man.
So Cats and the Kings.
Cat and the Kings.
Cat and the Kings.
That was from South Africa. These people were just virtuosic performers. They came with tracks already, and we just replaced the tracks. It was kind of the story about this band and their down and outs, and then it ends up in that big nightclub concert. I can't tell you how great these people were. And another great band, Frankie Santano, Mark Gross.
Really?
Ravi was in the band.
Oh, man. But a lot of the players from the 70s and 80s, once the the work dried up, wound up doing Broadway shows. A lot of your contemporaries, I'm sure, from back then are working on shows now. When did you see that change where, I mean, I guess you saw it from the dissolution of a lot of New York City studios. People were like, okay, what am I going to do now? Let me go to shows. Was it something that you guys were like, all right, let me do this? Or was it just something like, well, this is what's left. Let's go to do some shows?
I think I saw it in the 90s, man, because that's up until then, I was a dabbler on Broadway. Seeing like David Spinoza in the band For the Life. I don't know. David is like, he's A1 kind of dude. You'd see a lot of the horn guys, but they always kind of dabble in that scene. But yeah, guys like Buddy, Francisco, Ira Siegel, Larry Saltzman. You know who was an innovator, man? Who switch over, dude. The innovator was Brian Brake.
I talked to him for 4 hours. I'd love to get him on this podcast, but
Well, he told you about his theme Grease, right? So, well, he did Grease years ago when because Brian was like a busy studio guy. He did it and I think some of his peers are like, Brian, you're ruining your life, man. Because in those days, like I said before, there was a caste system. I mean, it was such a heavy caste system. You didn't want a phone number that didn't have 212. 212, you would jive,
Wow.
Oh man, it was brutal. But no, in those days, no respectable studio guy was going to go play on Broadway. No way. But you know what then, man? Even before that time, there were these weird other times. Well, Cranshaw used to sub in Jesus Christ Superstar, I think, and Harold Wheeler used to play Promises, Promises. There was a little bit of it then, but not like now.
So it was the 90s where a lot of those musicians
I think that's when the studio thing really started to fade out. I think with the synthesizer and sequencing and MIDI was the, whatever they call that in the sand, that was the dividing line. Because like I said, before that, every piece of music had to have a human.
Did you wind up learning how to program drums?
Good question. I have a good answer. I looked at it from far away and I said, I don't want to do that. And then this guy I always did demos for as a drummer, he goes, hey man, I want to get some of this kind of new sound on my thing. Can you recommend someone to program for me? So I borrowed my friend's Oberheim DMX, I think. He taught me how to program. I programmed the song, came to the studio, I plugged it in. The guy gave me money. And then soon after that, I bought a Lynn drum. And I had Simmons drums. And I did a lot of programming for people. In those days, they didn't have loops. So unless you're really good, you can't get Lynn drum to feel like a drummer unless you're really gifted or you're a drummer. All the wacky stuff we do with the hi-hat, that's where the phrasing, that's the magic. The one volume thing, tick, 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 the little lopey stuff with the accents, that's where the feel comes from. So I did a lot of it, man. I made a lot of money or a living, whichever you want to call it. And then loops came out. And then I used to know how to use Performer really well. And I used it all the time. And then it became Digital Performer. And I totally lost interest because they didn't need me anymore. There's like a loop that's like amazing, I mean, you can get loops now. Peter Erskine playing the Brushers or Steve Gadd loops. It's just Steve Gadd loops are like amazing. Steve Gadd.
Right. Was that at the same time where Seussical came in? Where you lost interest in all that stuff, and was the show Seussical part of a transition into doing regular, from show to show?
No. After The Life, there was another show. Maybe it was the Civil War. I don't know. I really don't remember, but Seussical was all on V drums. The electronic revolution was way, way, way in there by then. They didn't have, we used V drums for the whole show. You know what? I can't remember the order of sequences.
Did you program a lot of the sounds into the V drums?
Yeah, that's a bad subject, Clayton.
Uh,
You know how Broadway is from that first rehearsal. You know when you turn the timer over, the sand going down. There was all this talk of like doing extensive programming, like they had programmers, but we ran out of time, man. And in the last weekend, for the first preview, maybe the tech guy and Doug Vesterman and me just put together 3 or 4 drum sets, and that was the show. They really wanted to do it really nuts, like some kind of, for Horton the elephant, like some elephant banging his foot, and that would be the bass drum, really film score. But, Broadway, man, it races along. The closer you get to the finish line, it's harder and harder to make those things happen.
were you doing a lot of subbing around this time? I guess this is the 90s, correct?
I was a dabbler in subbing. I've always been a little dabbler, but I wasn't like these guys. Yeah, I know 5 shows. I did 9 shows this week, and I was never that guy. I subbed at Annie. I subbed at Beauty and the Beast, City of Angels, but it was not one of those 24/7 subbing guys.
Was it because something was always brewing as far as the next show, or he just didn't really want to put in the time? Or
No, I was willing to put in the time, but something was always brewing. Tommy Igo at the beginning of Lion King asked me to sub, and then I got a gig. I got the show at the Life, so I couldn't do it. And there was always something like that. I was always saved.
I, I hear you.
Remember,
'Cause,
Andres asked me to sub in the off-Broadway version of In the Heights, and I started working on it. We know how Andres plays. Not a walk in the park. The guy's kind of a virtuoso. And thank God I was saved by the bell and got a call for a show, so I didn't have to complete this action. So in the old days, there weren't so many musical styles in the old days, right? It was like the 2-beat thing, the swing beat. You hit the cowbell and a wood block, maybe a little Latin feel. And the orchestrators then didn't write out everything. It was like slashes a lot with a couple of hits. So guys in those days would come and sight read shows. Steve Little used to go and come in, and he was a great reader, and it's in cut time. So it wasn't so nuts. Then pop music came in, and then the orchestrators started to go nuts. But like in the old days, people would come in sight read shows all the time on all kinds of instruments. There wasn't as many different styles. So pop music came in. Now the orchestrators got extremely picky and specific, up to where we are now, where you get the orchestrator who prints out his Logic drumming, and you have to figure out what that is. It's probably harder today, even though today you have the conductor video and you make tapes and all this. I think it's much harder today, man. Like if I had to go and sight read Irene, that show, okay, it's doable. You go try to sight read your show. I'm sure like whatever you open the hi-hat at the end of 4, if they don't hear that, you're going to hear about it. It wasn't like that, man. It was more jamming, playing crazy little, and not just from what I experienced, but people older than me told me it was like that. Like over there in Jesus Christ Superstar, the original production, they just rocked out. They went insane.
well, speaking of sight reading, there's a legendary story. I don't know how many people know about this, but I heard about it. You must have done something fantastic to make this happen, because I know I couldn't do it. I'm not the greatest sight reader. I can read, I can sight read, but to do a show in real time for the first time, fantastic. So let me just give a little backstory. I was at a show called Memphis the Musical, and there was a show next to me in the next theater called Baby It's You. And the drummer, Raymond Pounds, great drummer, played on Songs in the Key of Life, bunch of different sessions in the 70s and 80s, I'm sure, and fantastic drummer, but he didn't know the whole Broadway scene. It's a whole different thing. He thought he was never going to take off and never have it sub, and he didn't have any subs. And that kind of caused a problem because he got tied up in between shows and he wasn't able to make the evening show. So the musical contractor was in a bind. He didn't have any subs to cover the show. So he called up Warren Oates. And from what I understand, you were coming back from vacation. You were getting into your. tell me the rest of the story. You can take it from here.
I was coming back from camping, and then I was going to go to the drive-in that night. And so I kind of smelled really bad, like a barbecue camping guide. And I said, you know what? I'm just going to, I lived upstate in Monroe then. I'll just take a shower because the drive-in's kind of a smelly place. When I come back, I'll take a shower. So sitting on the stoop, waiting to go to the drive-in. Get in your car right now and go to the whatever the theater was. Well, I can't. I smell. I get in your car right now. So I drove to the theater, parked the car. I think I walked in at 25 to the gig. Maybe it was 8:00 show. I walked in at 25 to 8. Michael Aarons found a wardrobe person, put me in an outfit. Shelton Beckton talked to me through as much as he could. And we hit it. Now, I have to say, the thing that made it a little bit more possible than not possible is most shows come out of the gate with that blazing opening number, the one they work on in rehearsals for a month with tons of choreography. This show didn't do that. It kind of like just dripped along for a while. A song, stop, a little thing, little cue. It wasn't like a big extravaganza. Fortunately, 20 minutes, 40 minutes into the show, Raymond showed up and I was freed from bondage.
Ah, I didn't know it ended like that. Okay.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. So that's how I was able to get through it. It was still insane. It was still totally insane. You're like, you don't know any tempos. You don't know anything.
Right. Never heard the music before, ever.
You don't know anything. And the part wasn't really Mark because it wasn't Mark. He never, like you said, expected to take off. But Shelton was great. And like I said, I was able to piece it together and I didn't have to play the whole show. I'm sure that show by the time it's over, there's got to be one kick-ass choreographed insanity moment, and you know what those are like.
Mm-hmm. The whole dance break thing. Well, speaking of high pressure gigs, you were the drummer for the Tony Awards for many years. How did that work out?
It's a lot of pressure. I don't think it's as bad as the old days. I think in the old days, the studio band played all the shows that came in. And I think in the old days, they played a lot of stuff live. I think it was like, ladies and gentlemen, here's your show. And the studio orchestra plays the show. We didn't do that so much, but yeah, you'd go in every morning at 9 and, there's reading, playing, recording, it's all the interlude music and this and that and the other thing. Most shows are complicated. They brought their drummer. Some shows that didn't have enough money or the music wasn't so nuts, I had to play. And that was, it's challenging, man. You can't sit there making mistakes. You got to hit it.
What year was that where you started doing that?
It was the year I did that Sinatra show. I don't know when that is. But it was intense. And it really, it's really funny that people don't know. The silliest part of the intense was, and the winner is.
Tell me how that worked out, because I've done an off-Broadway thing. We have 5 different pieces of music.
It's exactly like that. But this is live TV around the intergalactic galaxy, and you got these little snippets, and the winner is, and the winner is, Memphis, and before you can even get your eye on it, the conductor throws his hands down. So you're looking at these things. It's like when you go to Yankee Stadium, where's the little under the cup?
Oh yes,
they have
yes.
Where's the object under the cup?
So did you have like 5?
what's that piece of music from Memphis? You and then sometimes they put their hands on, you start, and your eyes aren't even on the music. It's
Wow.
intense, man.
So during those time periods, you're playing live at the Tony Awards. Were you
Yeah.
in the pit of the theater? I know nowadays the band is somewhere else. Were you in the pit of the theater?
Uh, yes. I've
This is
done
the
it in a bunch of
2000s?
locations. We did it. I think we did it at Rachel Ray's studio one year, remote. I've done it on the stage of Radio City at the actual place, during the time of the show. It's been a mix and match. I think when they did it at the Beacon, we were in a remote because they didn't have enough room for a band.
I barely remember that. I don't think I was on the
Yes.
show during that time period.
But, it's live TV, man. I've done a lot of live TV. It's intense. It's intense. I mean, I remember talking to Sonny Ivo, Tommy's father, about, he used to sub in the Ed Sullivan Show. It's hard.
How did you get connected to the Tony Awards ceremony? Like, who was a musical director that got you in?
Well, I kept showing up there because shows I was doing were failing but nominated. So they kept seeing me and play all this different kind of music. They were all different shows. There was the Life, then there was the Sinatra show, and then there was Thoroughly Lamont and Millie. There were all these different styles. So they kept seeing me over and over again.
Come
And
Fly Away is what you're talking about? Is that the
Come Fly Away. That's right. And so they kept seeing me and they wanted to make a change. And I knew Kim Wirtz for years. And she claims that she didn't have much to do with it, but I think she did. Thank you, Kim. But, there was a jury. I mean, Elliot, his son, some of the orchestrators, Kim, and they saw me play a lot. And I guess, thank God, they thought they could trust me with this job. So, yeah, it was amazing that they had trust. I mean, I think Will Lee said it best. Any gig is a gift. When people trust you with their music and their job, that's that's huge, man. I don't take it lightly. I'm very grateful for that. Whether it's like the little wedding or the Tony Awards, they're trusting you with their thing.
right? Now you talked about the different styles that you've done. I don't know if this quote is attributable to you, but I've heard that, shows come in like Rent. And it's like, Rent, man, this is going to be the real rock musical. This is it, man. Or we got this, funk show coming up. It's, it's going to be a hip hop show. It's going to be real this time. And you're like, you know what? It winds up turning into Hello Dolly after all. Is that your quote?
I might have said that. I'm not sure. I know I've heard it a lot. I can't remember. It's kind of out there, but well, one thing I noticed is it's sort of like the jingle business of the old days. Yeah. Hardly anyone goes into the jingle business saying, I want to be in the jingle business. They're all like, they want to be poets. They want to be James Taylor. They want to be Chick Corea, but they do this jingle business, or like the guys who go, well, I don't do club dates. And I like to say to them, well, how many didn't you do this year? It's like, so all these Broadway shows, and I hate to say it, man, but I hear it all the time. We don't want our shows to sound like a Broadway show. This is going to be a real R&B show. This is going to be a real rock show. And, I'm sure in their mind, that's what they're thinking, but it is a musical. So, for instance, even Cy Coleman, who was a brilliant dude, The Life, he said, this is an R&B show. I want to get an R&B guitarist. So fortunately for us, they got David Spinoza, who's a complete guitarist. Because if they got a real R&B guitarist, Don Sebesky wrote pretty complicated music. I mean, it was hard for the guitar. Hard. So they always say this stuff. I remember Anything Goes at Lincoln Center. They go, we want a real big band drummer. We want the drummer from Count Basie's band. They get these things in their mind. It's a Broadway show, If you have mice, get an exterminator.
If you have mice, get an exterminator. Yeah.
It's just they're in denial. They always do it, man. Like I don't know why they need to do. Why can't they say it's a Broadway show? Because they want to be successful in Broadway.
Where do you see Broadway heading over the next, decade or so?
Well, I think it's like the jingle business, or like on advertising, you hear they play around with hip hop a little, and I think Broadway will continue to reflect what's out there in the real world. But at the end of the day, it's still storytelling. It's still something called a musical. And while we're here, people get bugged and they go, why does the conductor, we're in a groove and they got to speed the stuff up because there's some dancing. This is not a gig. It somehow has aspects of a gig. It's a show. And there's something going on with the dancing or the sets, or it's laying there and he needs to do whatever he needs to do. And he's got a stage manager saying something to him. It's just like a film score. It kind of sounds like Mozart a little, but it's serving a car chase or whatever's going on. And this whole thing about studio musicians make the best Broadway musicians, I don't agree with that. Broadway is a very specific skill. And I've seen a lot of people come into it who don't have any background in it and have a really hard time. And I mean, while we're here, people say to me, what do I need to know? And I go, here's what you need to know. I'm sure you play the drums great. I mean, at a certain level, everyone's pretty good. I said, you need to really be able to understand conducting. That is the deal breaker because you can't hope that some show's just going to be on a click forever. And even with the click shows, they come off the click. There's a little retard. That I have seen so many people get wasted on the conducting. And Broadway it comes out of this symphonic experience and sort of like the sister or brother of opera, you got to be able to follow a conductor. And I can't tell you, Clayton, how many jobs I've ruined because I couldn't figure it. I couldn't figure out the family secrets. I really ruined a lot of opportunities and made some bad music because I couldn't figure it out. I'm better with it now.
I was going to ask you, what's the most important thing a drummer should know about being a success on Broadway? And like, the family secret is following the conductor.
Look, assuming you can play the style that they want to have played, and assuming you're a reasonable human being who can show up on time and take direction, like when the conductor says, hey, you'll make that a little softer on the tom. Well, you just asked me to play it louder. Bad answer. The answer is yes. Yes. There's only one answer. Yes. You have to have a lot of empathy for these people. They're under a lot of pressure themselves. But in terms of the DNA of the experience, let's say you're doing a show and it's about Sly and the Family Stone, okay? And it's not on a click. You got to be able to figure out the conducting, because it is a show. And like you said, grooving, 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 grooving. All of a sudden, the grooving stops and we're into this little moment of something, film score, bizarro land. You got to be able to follow these guys. So you got to have the two skills. You got to be able to lay down that groove, but also be willing and talented enough to move when they need to move and make it sound seamless and do it with love and not bitterness. That's a big deal, man. Big, big, big deal.
Were you a kind of person that could take notes very well at first when a conductor after your show would give you notes about your performance, or were you like, no, I got it?
No, I took the notes, man. I took the notes. Yes, I took the beating, flogging. Well, because I assume, I worked for a lot of celebrities. And I know that they've heard the best drummers in the world. They've made records with all of the best, Jim Gordon, Steve Gadd, Bernard Purdy, the list goes on and on. They've heard how it's supposed to go. So even if they can't articulate what's wrong, I know in their head, they know when it's right. So, the conductor, there's something not going well, and you just got to tap into some ESP thing and try to figure out what it is.
What's the most difficult show that you've ever played?
The last one I did,
King
King
Kong?
Kong. Yeah.
Why?
There was no wiggle room in the beat. The guy who did the arrangements, the whole thing was on tracks. They really didn't need a band. Probably if they didn't do it on Broadway, they just would have used the tracks. It was that guy who did La La Land. I can't think of his name. The parts I got were like transcribed from his tracks, which had 6, 7 voices at one time. So I had to figure out, well, I only have 4 limbs. How am I going to do this? And the other thing was all the subdivisions were in there. 30-second notes. Like a click is tempo. So, you can wiggle around with it and get a groove, play your own groove. There was no wiggle room in this show. Precision, precision, precision. So if all the 30-second notes are being played and you have 16ths or 8ths played, there's no interpretation. You have to play really accurately, or else it's going to sound like flamming.
So you were playing along to something.
So a lot of it, we were playing along to tracks. For the most part, the drums were the heavy lifting bottom kind of B-ish. But then there was all this noise candy kind of stuff, spelling out the subdivisions.
Wow.
And man, it was really noticeable if you got out of your lane a little.
That's something that you had to train your subs to know about?
They figured it out right away, man. We had conversations. They all understood. Yeah, I mean, they did a great job. These guys are fantastic. And no wiggle room. It was really hard, man. Really hard.
So the conductor, taking good note, being receptive to positive or negative notes. In other words, being able to understand where you might have made a mistake or something that you can prove on, or things that drummers should know. But what should you never do when you're a drummer in a Broadway pit?
Well, I don't think it's a good idea to leave the script. I think in the old days that was a little easier to do. If you maybe could vary a fill a little bit here or there, but once you got it going, I think it's best to hang with that program if you're the regular, Plus, do you want to go cuckoo and you want a dancer to like have a hard time finding the downbeat because you needed to play your Vinnie Colaiuta fill? Not a great idea, man, Consistency is huge. Consistency of volume, attitude. I think bringing attention to yourself in general is a bad idea. A lot of moving parts in a Broadway show, but that's what comes to mind.
I guess on the flip side, what should you always do?
You'd always keep your eye on the conductor. Always, always. Even these click track shows, conductor might need to give you dynamic thing. And I think for peace of mind, they feel better if you're looking at them. So the drummer should really know the music and not be buried, their head in the music. Look at the conductor. And I know as a regular, I'll tell you from the first rehearsal, I'm thinking the subs. I try to make the setup as easy as possible for the subs. I want them to be able to see the conductor, which is usually TV in the modern world now, right? The TV, the music, and see the drums in their peripheral vision. Because no matter how many times they come in and practice, you know how it is. If you're not looking at a strange, you hit a cymbal by mistake instead of the floor tom. So make it so they could turn the pages easily, see the conductor, see the music, see the drums. The best thing, play with clarity, and try to help people in general, Try to help people. Maybe you're the regular and the sub is struggling. We've all been the sub. It's nerve-wracking. And
What's the longest running show that you've had?
I think Thoroughly Modern Millie, that was 2 years, I think. But I never had one of those, you're not looking over your back kind of shows. I wonder what that would be like. I think actors call it golden handcuffs.
Or a government job?
Government job. I think I made that one.
I don't know. Did you have any endorsements that came from these shows?
I'm not great in that self-promotion area. I've had an on and off thing with the Yamaha drums. I got discounts. I have a Vic Firth endorsement. Not that, yeah. The answer is I never pursued it. I'm a little light on the marketing of myself.
Did they ever pursue you?
I know what you're saying.
Did they ever look out and seek you?
No. And I'll tell you, I did the show Lennon, got John Lennon, and I had to get the company to do it, or I did it. I can't remember the sequence of events. Thinking Ludwig, Ludwig, Ringo, Beatles. Ludwig didn't want any part of it. They said, you know what? We just we don't we don't want to get involved in this whole Broadway thing. We were on stage, man.
Yeah, I was going to ask you. You were on stage and it had something to do
Yeah.
with the Beatles.
Gibson ended up giving us a set of drums. Gibson was Pearl. No, wait, it was
Slingerland?
Slingerland. That's right. We got a set of Slingerland drums, which didn't resemble Slingerland drums at all. They were like Gretsch drums with die-cast rims. Remember those cool Slingerland oops? These drums didn't have those at all.
That's one of my first drum sets was a Slingerland Butcher Block drum set. You watched them, is it 1962 or 1964? It was 62?
It was.
I should know this.
Shame.
Shame on me.
Slingerland was 60. It was November 63.
Kennedy
No, wait,
was
it was February. Kennedy was assassinated November 63.
Right. So 1964, you watched the Beatles on Ed Sullivan, and in 2000s or 2010s, when was Lennon? Do you remember what year that was?
Is this a trick question?
No. Well, whatever year it was, were you on stage with a mop top, and were you impersonating?
No. We were just in the regular black shirts.
Oh, okay.
But I tell you, man, I forgot about that show because the director was a Beatle nut. And, the dancer, when you're in that, the drummer, piano player, that rehearsed part of the gig. So he had all these, like the Beatles gear. And then they actually went to the real tailor in Liverpool for those original polyester Beatle suits with the no
gray
collars.
ones.
And then they got the actual Beatle boots from the real guy.
Wow.
And I was just like, this is like the holy grail for me.
Okay, so I didn't hear the music. So when you're doing the music, this is going to be just like the Beatles, then it winds up being a Broadway show.
That's worse than that, Clayton. Worse than that, my friend. Yoko Ono wouldn't let us do any Beatles songs.
Wait a minute. What?
Yes, let me repeat that. Yoko Ono said you can't do any Beatles music. The only Beatles things we did were covers, like we did Money, the Motown song Money, Twist and Shout, but none of the stuff that the Beatles actually wrote. I think we did do the Ballad of John and Yoko, I think. All John Lennon songs, post Beatles. And
so it was John Lennon's music, not the Beatles.
John Lennon's music. And I went nuts and I transcribed all the double fantasy stuff. I wrote it all out. And I went nuts trying to figure out instant karma. I spent so many hours trying to figure that out because the drums were it's like they had towels on all. Remember that record, Instant Karma?
I had to listen
all
to
the
it
drums
again.
had the same pitch because I think he had towels on them and they were like a lot of reverb. I didn't know which drum he was hitting. I actually called him up to his office. Alan White from Yes.
Oh, yeah.
I think he's the drummer on that. And I just could never get him on the phone or his office. I went into total CSI instant karma mode. So I did the best I could, but I got really close to playing those songs the way they were.
Do you go back and listen to your cast recordings that you've done in the past at all? Ever?
No, we never did a cast recording for Lennon.
I
don't think we did.
But other ones that you've done in the past, did you ever go back and listen to them?
I was doing some cabaret gig or something, and the club owner put on all these cast records, and he put on the Thoroughly Modern Millie record. I said, man, that sounds familiar. But then I realized what it was, and I said, yeah, that sounds pretty good. I've heard that The Life sounds really good. No, I don't. I'm just that kind of guy, and Maybe people do. I don't know.
Do you ever go see the shows that you're in to see them from the audience and like take a night off and watch it?
No.
And why is that?
I know when I did American in Paris, a bunch of people in the orchestra were taking off. They said the sound was a little bizarre. They were disappointed.
That's what I hear from a lot of musicians. They don't see the show that they're in because when they hear it from the audience, they're disappointed because they can't hear all of the intricate things that they're doing in the pit.
That's a whole other topic, man. I'm just going to put it because I'm really old and almost dead now. So I'm just going to say, when people make these parts too complicated with all the like 40 different little gongs and triangles, you know what the sound guy does? You've done shows, you do shows. The sound guy comes down, he looks at your setup and he goes, okay. And he puts one mic over all of that stuff, you know? And basically, he's not going to have the time to balance all of that stuff. These Paul Simon records that we love, that's like a lot of hours of mixing to get the triangle just over there in the distance. So you're basically doing it for yourself, your own enjoyment, but you're just making it harder, man. I think that's my take. Getting into these wacky setups, man, and I don't want to put subs through this. It's become like when I went to music school, these elaborate modern percussion setups for modern, like contemporary classical music. It's like, man, we're playing a boogaloo. What are you doing?
Yeah. I make it easier on myself the older I get. But
I'm not interested in making it more nuts than it needs to be. Because some of that also is for the dog and pony show at Carol's. It's like show and tell, like producers, oh my God, look at all these, oh, this is and oh my God. But I can't tell you, man, I've gone to see other shows that I've subbed on. And it's like in the audience, it's like, wow. I can't
mhm.
wow, where is that thing that they obsess about?
I want to thank you very, very much for being a part of this. I loved learning about your history and all the things that you've done over the years, and uh, a lot of words of wisdom.
Thank you, my man.
And we'll definitely talk to each other sooner than later.
Stay safe.
All right, you too.
Ciao.
Thanks.